Right, well, we'll talk about the Ofcommunists now. So that's Nigel Farage. He was on, that's an interview with Camilla Tominey talking about who regularly beats, well, both of them actually regularly beat Sky News and the BBC. And Camilla was interviewing Nigel about this GB News ruling where Ofcom have said that, well, in what was a incredibly political statement, they've come for GB News. Now, I had said at the time, and I just realised I haven't got it up here, but I had said at the time, when I read this ruling straight away, I thought, hang on a minute, because I said, I see Ofcom once again continue their constant attrition against GB News, this time on politicians hosting shows. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. I remember, I've been around this world for a little while now. I can remember a fair few shows being fronted by Labour politicians. LBC, David Lammy, Sundays at 10 a.m. I'd rather shove hot needles in my eye. Chris Bryant. Sunday from 1 p.m. Again, I'd rather shove hot needles in my eye. I'd rather shove a cactus up my bottom than listen to that one. Angela
I think Chris
Rayner.
Bryant might enjoy that.
Well, maybe. Angela Rayner. I do not want to listen to the Ginger Growler talk on LBC for ad nauseum about goodness only knows what. But you go back to this Ofcom decision, and Nigel is absolutely right to argue that it is a nakedly political decision because they haven't done it to the other party. They've never said it about LBC. And it strikes me that what they're saying is that viewers are too thick to tell the difference between a news bulletin read by a news reader who is impartial, and an opinion segment, right? And in their infinite lefty wisdom, they've determined that Jacob Rees-Mogg and Esther McVeigh simply appearing on screen is going to confuse us hopeless plebs, even though the channel clearly differentiates factual news from commentary, that we'll all be confused and sent into a tizzy and not know what's coming and what's going. Pull the other one, you absolute morons. This is an agenda. That's what this is, Alex.
Yeah, it's absolutely an agenda. And funnily enough, Darren, I was invited on the BBC, Ofcom's best friend, to talk about this the other day on BBC Radio Northern Ireland, weirdly enough. And they got on their panel two very strongly opposing people. One of them was an ex-director at Ofcom, and it was very interesting to hear what he had to say because he hated BBC and GB News. And I made the point of saying, well, look, Nigel Farage regularly beats BBC and Sky News, and he went on this absolute devastating rant about how GB News was basically illegal and all these things. And it just proves that the people who are working there are out to get us, or the ex-people who used to work there, are still out to get us as well. And GB News, I go on the show regularly, Darren, I know you guys do too as well, but it's always got a counterbalance in the show. It's always got a left wing. I am never unchallenged in my opinions, and I'm probably more right wing than a lot of the people who go on GB News. But I'm never left unchallenged. I'm always challenged if it's not by a presenter, but by another left wing guest on the show every single week. So these people don't even watch GB News. It's very clear, and they obviously don't like the fact there are Tory Conservative MPs on the channel. And I'll wrap this up by saying one more final thing on my perspective as well. GB News regularly attacks the Conservative Party because I know I do. I know you do, Darren. I know other guests on the show regularly attack the Tories. And so to call us this sort of Tory outlet is just so far from the truth. Yes, there may be some presenters on there who are Conservative MPs, but we've got Gloria Di Piero, who is also an ex-Labour MP. And I suspect, I don't know for sure, but I suspect producers have reached out to ex-Labour MPs and current Labour MPs to get their shows on GB News too, but they probably said, no, I don't want to go on there. So, what we do our best. We always do our best.
I get so many lefties that say I won't ever appear on GB News, but they're more than happy to appear on Murdoch's Talk TV. And I think you prefer Rupert Murdoch over a fledgling media startup that is proposing to speak to working class communities up and down the country. I just don't understand that. But Chloe, do you think that what this is all about ultimately is that the metropolitan, the media elite, of established broadcasters, they just can't abide the existence of an upstart who don't conform to their progressive world view, right? They're desperate to actually paint GB News viewers as gullible rubes who have been hoodwinked by scheming rich Tories. It's utter tripe, isn't it? Ordinary Brits aren't nearly as stupid as Ofcom seems to believe, despite the fact that we're stupid enough to fund these charlatans.
Ofcom have clearly exposed themselves exactly for who they are with this attack on GB News. They've really shot themselves in the foot with this attack, and GB News have exposed them for what they really, really are. Now everyone can see, because this attack is so insane and irrational, what their agenda really is. Before this, some people would have had doubts if Ofcom, with their previous investigations, were just doing their job or if they had an agenda. It is now clear as day who these people really are. Politicians are allowed to be on air and talk. They're just not allowed to break news. Yes, they've gone after GB News. They also did go after Talk TV. They went after Jake Berry. I've been on Jake Berry's show many times. And when there is breaking news to be read out, they bring somebody else in the studio to do it. They're just attacking anybody who is conservative or reform or anyone on the right who wants to host the show, because they can't bear. This is the thing with the left, is rather than actually debating people who they disagree with, they spend all their time and energy just trying to shut their voices down because they don't have a good argument against us.
Yeah. Interestingly, during that you're just sort of nailing it there, Clay. During that podcast I went on, the radio channel I went on with the BBC, and the Ofcom director, they said, well, Nigel Farage is a politician. And I was like, but is that what it says in Ofcom's guidance? Because I don't think it is, because Nigel Farage is an honorary president. He's not the president of Reform, let's be clear. And he's not standing for election at the moment either. So no one's voting. So I kept on having to explain to them, what is the rules? And even the ex-Ofcom director didn't seem to know what defined a politician, which is striking. And I said, why don't Ofcom put out some clear rules? If they look, the reality is GB News don't want to get slapped by Ofcom. Like, this is a fact. They don't want to be in trouble with Ofcom, but the Ofcom rules are so obscure and they're such an enigma that you have to try and navigate your way around them somehow. And look, the same with the People's Forum, it's just, like the Prime Minister was invited to an audience of people, and it's still that broke impartiality rules. How?
And it was an audience of people that were put together by an independent polling company.
Exactly.
And we knew nothing about the questions in advance. So that again, is completely not a nonsense. But just to highlight what you said and what GB News actually replied with, they said, extraordinarily, Ofcom has determined that a programme which it acknowledges was impartial and lacking in any expression of opinion still somehow breaches its impartiality rules, just because an imaginary viewer might think otherwise. Ofcom has now arbitrarily changed the test so that it's no longer was it impartial, but could someone think it might not be? Now, how convenient is that, right? How convenient is that at a moment when we're saying British broadcasting is in dire need of a shake-up, we're going to do something about it, and a few delicate sensibilities within this Ofcom, this regulator, these Ofcommunists, they get offended in the process. The last thing that we actually need is a bunch of unaccountable bureaucrats putting the squeeze on any channel that dares to shake up the stuffy status quo. I think, frankly, GB News, and I'm saying this in a personal capacity, not in a business capacity, GB News should tell Ofcom to sod off, right? The viewing public are crying out for a bit of variety, for some presenters with personality. And if these pearl-clutching Puritans can't handle it, when they're bloody well welcome to change the channel.
I think that GB News was really brave to put out this, because until now, GB News has been in a really difficult position where Ofcom have kept on hammering them with investigation after investigation. But if GB News launched an attack back at them, Ofcom potentially have the power to take them off the air and end the project. So they've been at the whim of Ofcom's demands. So for them to come out and be brave enough to put out this damning statement with, the risks that comes with, that means that Ofcom will potentially, make their attacks against them even stronger, because they've now, made made the relationship perhaps not as friendly. It was a really brave thing for them to do, but I think it just got to the point where something had to be said because Ofcom was just abusing them.
Yeah, you know, Clay, I'll just add to that because look, and I've said this so many times now. There are certain channels which I think Ofcom should apply to, particularly public-funded ones. I don't understand why, for private businesses and private independent news outlets, there needs to be a regulator of free speech. The audience can simply choose to flick over the channel. I do think there is always value in having a publicly funded organization that gives news in a very, very straight format that is censored to a certain extent. So there is always a reliable place you can get news. Not that I'm saying the BBC is doing a very good job of that, by the way. But for GB News and Talk TV and anyone, LBC included, by the way, and Channel 4 included, well, Channel 4 is actually public, so let's exclude them. But for any private broadcaster, there shouldn't be these restrictions on freedom of speech. They're basically saying, you Brits, you're too stupid and dumb to see through what's an opinion and what's news. That to me is demeaning, and I think Ofcom should be shut down, wrapped up, and just rolled into some BBC legislation that says that's your rules, BBC, Channel 4, and anyone else that's publicly funded.
Yeah, well, or better still, we could just stop funding the bloody BBC, in my opinion. I'm just so sick of being dictated to by these self-appointed moral betters, these arbiters of what is and isn't impartial, what is and isn't truth, what is and isn't racism, what is and isn't fascism, what is and isn't far right, what is and isn't transphobic, these isms and phobias. I'm so sick of it all, and it is making our country worse. Have you got what it takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk, and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.